be whenever I start talking. I gotta keep getting everything set up since I'm having some very clear technical difficulties here for whatever reason. Let's see if I can get this rolling here. Just give me 1 second, guys. We will get it rolling. Promise. If you hear any background noise, it is a lovely Sunday afternoon and we are doing some work around the house. So do not mind that. Alrighty. So, I would like to apologize for having to move the time slot for today. I was initially going to be streaming at around my usual time in the evening, because I know most of you guys are free toward the later times of the evenings, but make sure you guys can actually see this. Okay, it's a little lopsided, but it works. But I wanted to be sure that I was still able to get this out here so you guys can at least watch it back. So I will wait a couple more minutes and we'll get to rolling. Make sure the sound's working. Sounds good anyway. Cool. Perfect. Give it a couple more minutes. Such a beautiful day out. Love when it's a super nice day out like this. I wish it was like this all the time. It's like not too hot, not too cold, not too anything. It's like perfect. Literally perfect. I'm going to try to do this. I don't know if I can light. There we go. Kind of spooky, but it works. So, wait 1 minute longer. I figured that this wasn't going to have the best viewership given that I swapped this very, very recently, which is okay. Alrighty, I'm going to kick this off. Hello, if you are skipping to this part, that means you are skipping to the goods of this video, which will be where I actually just start discussing these topics that I've been talking about in the pathway of learning. So, before I get started, I would like to express a momentous amount of gratitude for each of you for your support because we have reached 100 subscribers. Woo! That is a very big milestone in only, what, 3-4 weeks this channel has been actively, like, as this channel has actually been active. So I am extremely appreciative for each of you, for all of your support. Even if you aren't a subscriber and just watching this, please be sure to leave a subscription. It really, really helps me out and make sure the channel is growing and making sure that I can give back to as many of you as I can in the best way that I can. And that is what this channel is all about. So let's start to discuss the basics of what I was discussing within the pathway of learning. So if I recall correctly, which I'm going to look at it here on my other screen. So where we left off in our pathway of learning, we're starting to kind of move off from this initial part of the whole, what the pins are doing, and as the ball is going through the pins and the deflections, and we're starting to kind of make our way back to us as bowlers, and we're starting to talk about the most difficult part, which is going to be how the navigation process is. How is that ball moving, and how is that ball skidding and utilizing its friction characteristics to navigate to create that end goal that we're all looking for. Now, obviously, you'll come to realize how obviously this ties very hand in hand with the physical things we're doing that are helping us to create those things that the ball is doing. However, it's still important that before we start to worry about the physical stuff, we should focus on what it is that we should be looking for as that ball is traveling down the lane. Now, I've talked about entry angles and how all that stuff goes in. So this is how we actually get those angles and get that ball to navigate to that position on the lane. So very, very clearly, just basing this off of the view count, especially for those of you watching this back or have been watching, I've noticed a very, very clear correlation to how much people have been watching these videos about the lane and the ball motion and such versus those of you watching the videos about the pins. Now, I understand that this stuff is the stuff that everyone has questions on. The navigation part and how that bowling ball is traveling down the lane is a very, very common thing that people want to figure out, as well as the physical game. But I don't want any of you to steer clear from the fact that you have to understand what those pins are doing and how that ball is traveling through those and how those angles of entry are relating to how much deflection it is that you are getting. So, like, just for example, like the bowling ball deflection video has 88 views, and the lane, which I figured you guys were going to like that, has 640. So there's very clearly, and I'm not complaining about that. I'm very, very happy that you guys are finding content you enjoy, but I just want to make sure that all of you are aware. I would strongly advise for all of you to make sure that you have seen the entry angle video and the pin deflection characteristics video prior to watching the other stuff. That's why that pathway of learning is regimented in the way it is. So, navigating the bowling ball down the lane. So, everybody is always going to always be confused about this because we literally can't see it, guys. Like, this is a invisible playing field. I always talk about that football field and how it's like teaching people to play football, but they don't know where the actual end zone is or where the field actually is. And that's a difficult concept to get across somebody's head. So I'm going to try my absolute best here to map things out in a way that makes sense. So obviously, I've talked a lot more extensively about the oil, and I'm going to say the thing that you've heard every teacher in your life say and say that I'm not a good artist, so bear with me. This is our lane. The amount of blue is the oil. So I talked about, I should have drew arrows on here. That would have been a nice thing to draw. But within those center two arrows, this is where the majority of the oil lies. So the darker it is, the more there is. So the majority of the oil is in the center of the lane, and the more we move toward the corners, there begins to be less, and on the very, very edge, there's literally no oil. So obviously, as I talked about in prior live streams and such, this is what allows for you to have a lot more forgiveness, because if we miss to the right of wherever it is we're standing, that means it's going to see friction sooner, thus hook more, and get to the pocket. Versus if we miss to the left, well, it's gliding through that 10 times amount of oil in the center of the lane for longer, thus making it hold more and stay on line with the pocket more. So obviously, this is the most forgiving thing you could want, right? In an awful world, if you were bowling on the exact opposite, it would be extremely hard to navigate that because everything would be working against what we're trying to create. So different patterns and such provide different amounts of forgiveness because they have different amounts of ratio from the center toward the outer edge of the lane. So obviously most common league patterns are going to have around a 10-to-1 ratio. That's a pretty high ratio, guys, right? However, once you move into the sport patterns, it starts to become maybe a 3-to-1, a 1.5-to-1, or in some awful cases, a 1-to-1, like I showed in that red box pattern in the oil pattern video. So obviously, that kind of stuff plays hand in hand with how you're utilizing that oil. But the bottom line is what I'm trying to make you guys, what I'm trying to make clear to all of you guys is that you can play the lane in different ways, right? How you manage friction is going to be different depending on how you throw and how you are choosing to throw. Now, let's not steer clear from the fact that there are other bowlers that are also causing things to happen. So, within these past couple of videos, I've kind of discussed how things are always changing, right? With me, I don't know if you guys can see, I got like a new water cooler thing, and I'm like loving it. It's so nice. I have water right down here where I'm sitting. It's perfect. And so because we have, where was I at? I just like lost my train of thought. That water was really good. It's like a brand new cooler. It's like actually pretty cool. So other people are bowling. So this oil, this invisible stuff that we're trying to figure out, does not stay put and does not stay in the exact way it is, right? So when you're bowling, I touched on it very, very briefly in the previous video I posted with the bowling ball motion and how it flares. Now, this is a concept that goes into bowling ball, like ingenuity and the hidden technology inside of that, but I wanted to cover this concept because this is extremely critical for you to understand depending on the equipment that you like to throw. So if you've ever been bowling and you create rotation with the bowling ball, you may notice those little rings of oil that go around the ball. So anytime any ball, whether it's a urethane, solid, hybrid, reactive, a plastic, or even an old plastic, or even the old rubber balls from like the 80s or whatever, all those are in fact chewing up and soaking and sometimes even redepositing that oil at a later part in the lane. So as you're bowling, the amount of oil that is supplied on the lane is literally getting soaked up and wiped off. When people are wiping off their balls with rags, they're doing that because their ball is soaking up that oil. And if you don't have a rag, I'm going to touch on this again later. If you don't have a rag, I would strongly advise you get one, because if your ball is picking up more oil and it's spewing up stuff everywhere, the ball motion is going to vary if that cover is not maintained to stay the same every time, right? If you, like, that would be like me, like, rolling my ball in water and then trying to throw it and expecting it to have the same result. It's not, right? There's liquid on the ball. It's going to have a different motion. So wipe off your bowling balls. But what that means is there's less oil on the lane as time's going on. However, where it's located is also changing. So we all know, as we're bowling, at least for those of you who are bowling commonly, most of you are going to come to find in most cases that the ball is just hooking sooner, right? The ball is just hooking more, because as that ball is going down lane, people are drying up oil. Over here and over here. So the oil is getting drier. So that means if I throw over that same spot, it's going to see more friction because there's less resistance coming from that oil that was in that spot, thus making it hook more or sooner, right? So that's the obvious one. So now let's go back into that part I was discussing with the bowling ball and the flare. So some bowling ball, thanks for the videos. I will look at the other videos. Of course, Mark, of course. I'm glad that they're helping you out. They're really, really good. I think these new ones are really, really good. And I really appreciate you for your support. We hit 100 subscribers. Yeah, it's pretty cool stuff. So what do I mean by this when I say that oil is going in different spots and the ball's flaring? So depending on, if you look at a bowling ball, I wish I had like an illustration or something of a ball. Every time that ball's rolling, it's creating a line of oil, right? Because it rolled over that spot. So those lines could be spaced out to where they're all around the ball in different areas, and sometimes they can be pretty close. Like the distance from the furthest lines on the left and right side can be this far or this close. So if it is a high flare bowling ball, that means that bowling ball, those rings are far away, meaning every time that ball is rolling, it's rolling over a different part of the ball. Versus a low flaring bowling ball where those lines are tighter and not as wide, that means it's partially rolling over a spot that it already rolled over before. Now, what does that mean? Let's think. If it's a high flare bowling ball and every time that ball rotates one time, it's seeing a different part of the surface, that means it's always using a dry part of the bowling ball, right? If it's like mopping, right? And then behind you is all like the water and in front of you is all nothing, right? It's like that. It's always seeing a different part of that bowling ball versus a low flare bowling ball where those lines of oil are tighter. It could be rolling over some oil that it rolled over in the beginning part of the lane, thus making it not be as, usually reactive stuff likes to wait, go, because it's seeing a different part of the bowling ball the whole time. And when it gets to the cutoff of the oil, it sees a bunch of friction and it takes off. Versus your urethane stuff and your solids, where they're a lot smoother, they roll over that oil so they're smoother. So they're not as aggressive when the oil cuts off because it's rolling over oil the whole time. So depending on how people throw and what bowling balls they throw, that also, like if I throw a bowling ball and Mark threw a bowling ball, if we threw the same ball, it would not have the same flare because him and I release the bowling ball a little bit differently, right? So depending on who's throwing it, obviously will dictate that. But to any capacity, high flare bowling balls are meant to see a different part of the ball every time it rolls over, and low flare is designed to go over a spot that it already rolled over. So if there's a lot of low flare bowling balls, I should grab blue, that means it's going to dry up a ton in the beginning part where that surface is fresh, and then down lane, since it's rolling over those same lines that rolled over, it's actually going to accentuate this. So if we have a bunch of urethanes coming here they come, and they get here, it's going to roll over it, thus creating, I like to call it a splash zone. So this is the cutoff of the oil, right? Here's all the oil, whatever. We can see it's drying up in the beginning right here where people are throwing. Then toward the end, it's usually not this drastic because it's just lines. It'll have little lines of darkness. So now the beginning part of the lane is becoming softer or less, or there's more friction in the beginning part of the lane, and the part where the oil initially cut off, let's say the oil cut off at 40 feet on this pattern that we're bowling on, right? If there's a bunch of urethane stuff and they're all redepositing oil past that line, that oil pattern in this select spot now becomes 41 feet, 42 feet, and so on and so forth. So if you stand in one spot the whole time, your ball motion will not be the same ever. I'm confidently telling you, if you tried to bowl, even a night in a league where there's all that forgiveness, if you tried to stand in one spot the whole night, I'm telling you, if you threw the ball the same way, didn't change your speed or anything, you will not be able to stay in that same spot. You are subconsciously, if you are staying in the same spot, I bet without realizing it, you're probably upping your ball speed or lowering your ball speed or changing your tilt or changing your angle of rotation off your hand. Something is changing in the back of your mind, whether you realize it or not, right? Because I'm telling you, no lane surface after any ball will be the exact same. There will be, sure, your ball's only traveling over a line this thick, but that line this thick, when there's 5 people on 2 lanes, there's 10 bowlers bowling games, like that adds up pretty quick how quickly you can transition, right? So what a lot of people come to find is their bowling ball hooks sooner, right? Because they're seeing that friction sooner. So they scoot to the left or scoot in so that way it stays out of this dry spot, right? But then when you throw, it hits this splash zone and now it's not hooking at all. And now you're stuck because you know, crap, if I move to the right, it's gonna hook so much out of my hand. And if I move to the left, it's gonna look like a sailboat and it's just gonna skid the whole way. I like to call that when the lane cliffs. It's almost like a cliff. Think of the outside of the lane as a cliff. If I throw out here, I'm jumping off the cliff and it's gonna hook a lot. And if I stay inside the cliff or inside of this oil, it's never gonna hook at all. So that is what we want to avoid. So what are some means of combating this? Well, for one, obviously we can change something physically that changes how early or late our ball is rolling, right? If we can, that's why a lot of people like to grab those solids and stuff, because if we can have a ball that reads the lane before this splash zone, like around this area or something, what's happening past here doesn't matter, because if the ball's reading this early, it's already done all the tech and everything. The tech's already done all the stuff the tech is trying to do, and the inside of the bowling ball and the precession process has already occurred, which I will go into that later. Since that's already occurred, this becomes now irrelevant because our ball's already done the thing, right? Our ball's already made its motion to get us into the pocket, right? But if we fall victim to that trap and we're only throwing in a way that's making our ball read following the end of the pattern, you're battling everybody's carry down, or you're battling against the splash zone. So find a way to navigate around that. Another thing you can do to navigate around it is if the splash zone is toward the center of the lane, well, get your ball to the outside of that, right? If I can just get my ball to the outside of that and have it hook here as opposed to in this crud in the splash zone, it's not transitioning, right? I'm avoiding all of it entirely, right? Or I could even like use that almost can kind of help me, because that means there's hold here. So if my break point or friction board, because there's no break point, we know that now, right? If my friction board is to the right of this and I'm striking and all of a sudden, oh dang it, I missed to the left, guess what? That splash zone is gonna have me hold it for longer, because if I miss to the left, it's like, oh God, it's gonna hook. Guess what? Oh, I hit the splash zone. Whoa, it held, boom, and I struck again. And now I got a double and I got all this momentum. So the lane is, when it's first laid out, house shot, that 10-to-1 ratio is designed to give you an advantage, right? Because you have all that room. But when the oil breaks down, it's up to you to create an advantage with the broken down oil, okay? There's a common misconception there, because this 10-to-1 ratio can almost become your enemy when it's broken down, right? If the ratio becomes all mumbo jumbled up and you're bowling in the middle, in the midst of where all of the stuff is changing the fastest, you're never gonna have a consistent ball motion to the pocket, because you're playing where all of the crap is changing, right? But if you either play to the right of that or play to the left of that or get a ball that reads before that splash zone, then you're gonna have a lot more consistency, right? So that's why there's this huge debate on whether or not on some patterns lefties have it easier, because for every 8 point, however many righties, there's one lefty within the sport of bowling, which means the transition is roughly about 1/8 as much as it is for us as right-handers. So that's why there's such a big debate. And if you notice some of these oil patterns that the professionals are bowling on, they're not, like if I took a knife and cut down the middle of the oil, the pattern's not the same on both sides. It's not. They make it a little bit differently, and it's because of that. It's interesting. It's very, very, very interesting how that works. So I like to discuss zones, right? So I always, just to make it easy when I'm teaching people, say there's 3 zones. What the heck, this pen? 3 zones within bowling. You have the first zone, which are your people that are standing more to the right. Maybe they might play up like the first or second arrow, maybe even like the 2, like almost close to the 3rd arrow. And they don't create a lot of rotation, and the ball is just kind of slowly kind of getting it. Not a lot of angle of entry. You got to play real tight on that head pin. That's your first zone. Your second zone is like your 3rd and 4th, like your 2.5 to 3.5 arrow, like in between, like just around the 3rd arrow is like your zone 2. Like you're very typical what you'll find most bowlers playing, because there's some oil there. They have to use that because they get a little bit more rotation. And then you have your 2-handers and your crankers that are playing up the center arrow or deeper to the left, and they're relying super heavily on that oil in the center. So depending on what zone you play, and depending on the zones that those around you are playing, that's going to break down the lane differently, right? And better yet, if you have X amount of people in zone 1, X amount of people in zone 2, and X amount of people in zone 3, how many are in each zone is going to have a very different breakdown as well, right? So a lot of it really is just trial and error, and better yet, seeing how your ball motion reacts to different things laid out in front of you, right? Especially if you're bowling, and again, I just use league because it's what we're all used to, right? In a league setting where you might be bowling up against people that aren't even hooking the bowling ball, that means that their stuff is always rotating over the same spot, which means it is just splashing so much oil forward, and then the pattern is just getting so screwy, because that 10-to-1 ratio can become like a 6-to-3 ratio because the oil is moving all around, and now it's like, oh my gosh, like you're either inside or you're outside. You got to kind of take your pick there. If you have any questions, ask. This is like the meat of what most of this pathway of learning is going to be, is navigating this stuff. So obviously, okay, so let's think. We know, okay, I have to avoid that splash zone, or if I'm not going to avoid it, use it to my advantage to create hold there, okay? Now, most of us, if we just continue to move left, and again, I always speak as right-handed, so if you're lefty, reverse this, obviously. If the lane in the beginning is always getting drier, if I move left, that should always just make sure the ball is continuing to read earlier and earlier and earlier before that splash zone, which commonly usually does work decently. Sometimes you might miss inside and you'll hit that splash zone super bad, and it just sails away, never really reads the lane the right way, and that deflection that just has no strong angle of entry. The technology has no time to hook in the correct way, and that's what we don't want. But what I will tell you is, I discussed this again. I'm not advocating you to create a disadvantage for somebody else, but you can certainly interpret this in your own way. However, you can create a big advantage for yourself. What am I talking about? All right, let's go back to my drawing. I'm going to try and scribble in these spots that I sort of erased earlier. All right, I know I tried to draw back in. So here's our oil, okay? Let's just say my plan is, when I actually start, like, they fire up for practice time. Okay, great. Let's say my plan is, I'm going to like throw some shots and figure out. It's like, okay, if I stand around, like around the center arrow when I'm delivering the ball, if I stand here and throw to, I don't know, here where this line is, I'm getting a pretty good ball motion, right? If I get to there, we're good. Now, if I keep throwing there the whole time in practice and while I'm training, and when the match actually begins, I'm now drawing up oil on that line and creating a splash zone. So now eventually I'm going to run into some bad ball motion. Eventually I am going to. However, let's say during practice, I decide I'm going to move way to the right. And I'm going to aim way outside and get my ball to hook and come in around here, just left to where my anticipated friction board is going to be, right? So that means it is now drying up the stuff to the left of where I will, to the right of where I will be. So it's drying this up early on. And since it's hooking so quickly, the splash zone, instead of being out here toward the back end of the lane, is now here. This is where I'm splashing up oil. Now, when the game starts and I move back to my initial spot, the spot that I'm throwing in the beginning lane now is no drier than when it was when I was before practice, since I stood in a different spot and dried out the right-hand side of me. And now the splash zone is to the inside of where I'm bowling, or to the left of where I will be throwing. So now when I throw, if I miss to the outside, that's fine. Nothing else has changed in the early part of the lane, so it'll hook soon. And let's say I missed to the inside. I missed way left. Guess what? That splash zone is now going to help it hold. So now I have help. I have even more help. I've now turned that 10-to-1 ratio from my current line I'm bowling on into a 11-to-1, maybe even a 12-to-1. And now it's like, okay, now I have a undying amount of forgiveness, and everyone else is struggling to do it. Now, I'm not, again, draw your own conclusions with this, but if someone else is bowling a different line than you, yeah, nothing's stopping you from doing that either. If you want to see a phenomenal example of that, a bowler that, my opinion, I never share my opinion on bowlers, especially on the internet, but Anthony Simonson is a good bowler to watch if you want to see someone who is extremely offensive-minded and is always willing to go out of his way to create an advantage for himself whilst also creating a disadvantage for his opponent. An example of this, I can't remember who he was against in this match. Let me think. It could have been EJ Tackett. I can't remember. But to any capacity, Anthony Simonson took a gem, which is a solid ball, already is designed to chew up a bunch of oil, and he sanded it down with a 180 grit pad. So if you're not familiar with that, which we'll get into later, that's like taking literal sandpaper onto sandpaper itself and gritting it down. So now it is chewing up so much oil. And before he went on and they gave him practice time, he was monitoring where EJ or whoever it was he was against was playing, and directly on where his line was threw his bowling ball for almost the entirety of practice. And then for the last couple of minutes, he just only aimed at Brooklyn's, because if you aim for Brooklyn's, right, if you go for the wrong side of the head pin, that means you're standing more to the right and getting it to go more to the left. So now he's not only creating a disadvantage for his opponent with that sanded up gem, he's now created a hold for himself. So then immediately his opponent was like, oh great, I'm gonna have to change. And then he spent the first half of the match poking around to find his new line he had to play. Well, Simonson just ran away with the game. It was like a no-brainer. It was like he completely swamped him. So again, I'm not advocating you to do stuff like that unless you want to, but what I'm saying is you have to cater that lane surface, because it's not always going to be forgiving. In the beginning, it's designed to give you the best forgiveness that it can, but if you don't play the lane the correct way, you're going to lose even more of that forgiveness, or almost in a way, the lane will almost be working against you. And that's exactly the very last thing we want to see happening, right? So that's something to always keep in the back of your mind throughout the entirety of this process. So, okay, so when we do have forgiveness, this is a big disclaimer, right? I've discussed this a couple times in live streams, but we have a good amount of viewership, and this is important. If you're here, I need you to pay attention. If you're bowling on a pattern and there's forgiveness, if there's a good ratio, like a house shot, or even like a challenge shot where in that given day and age, you've catered the lane surface, and let's say you can miss by an arrow and your ball will still get back to the pocket. You will still get punished silently, because your angle of entry will now have variance. Let me go into this, okay? Ignore all this stuff I've drawn up. I'm just going to draw this out very, very quickly to make it make sense. So if we're looking at here, let's say my target is, I don't know, this arrow. I know I haven't drawn an arrow. Let me get a different color. What do you guys like? You guys like red? I like red. We'll do red. If this red circle is my target, okay? And let's say the lane is just complete, I have catered it so well that I could miss by a whole arrow and it'll still get back to the pocket. When I hit my target, let's say the angle of entry is this. That's my angle of entry. And that is where I'm hitting the pin to get the correct amount of deflection through those pins. That's the deflection I'm getting. So perfect, we're in a great spot. Let's say all of a sudden I missed by an arrow. So let's say I missed way inside here. I missed way inside. So obviously that means it's going to have more longevity since it's in that oil. But now, since it has more longevity, the angle of entry is different. So now, sure, I'm hitting that same spot in the head pin. I'm still in the pocket. My angle of entry is now this one. And now all of a sudden, I'm leaving some sloppy stuff in the back because there's not enough deflection, or I'm leaving something in a corner or whatever. It is punishing you in that your angle of entry is now going to have some variance, right? The angle of entry will not be the same, right? So sure, if you're on a sport pattern where the ratio is 2-1 and you miss, it will punish you not so silently, because if you miss, it's just going to say, all right, guess what? You're not going to hit the head pin anymore, right? So you know right away, great, okay, it punished me for missing. So house shots and those high ratios, like patterns that you're bowling on, are designed to be forgiving in that it will keep you navigating into the pocket, but it will punish you in a much more silent way by maybe kicking you up a 10 pin, leaving you a swisher 7, even a super light split or a super heavy carry where you leave an 8 or 9 pin, right? The variance will still punish you with the angle of entry, right? But obviously we'd rather prefer that as opposed to me missing by an arrow or whatever and I just don't even make contact with the head pin, or I leave a really nasty split, or vice versa. I think you get the point. So that is the bottom line when it comes to that stuff. It's very interesting. There is a lot that goes into the navigation part. And I know some of these concepts I'm saying when I'm drawing it out, I'm doing my absolute best to bridge the gap of what the reality is and some imagery you can produce in your mind to help see that kind of stuff. And a way that I like to picture it that helps me at least and has helped many of the students and bowlers that I've coached throughout my coaching career is to think of a car on an icy road. So I kind of discussed this, but I'll break it down a little bit further for those of you that were not quite able to follow that whole idea or that whole imagery. So we're in a car, we're driving a car, right? And we're on a road. So think of the road as the lane, right? And think of it's snowing and there's ice on the road, okay? And the amount of ice on this road, I know it's a bowling lane, but think of it as a road. The amount of ice is the oil pattern. So think, okay, the center of that road has more ice, and the outsides of that road have more ice, and I'm driving a car, right? Whatever. Now, when you're hooking the ball, that's you trying to turn the car as you're driving, right? The speed of which the car is driving is the speed of which your ball is going down lane. How much the wheel is turned to the side is dependent on how much of angle of rotation that you create with your hand, and vice versa, right? Okay, I think this is starting to make sense for some of you. So we're driving this car down the road, and we're trying to get it to navigate to hit we'll just say a pin, right? A big pin, right? The car is trying to hit the pocket, right? Okay. And depending on how much of that ice that car is going through determines how easy it is for it to turn, right? So if it has to drive 600 feet, right? And the the ice cuts off after 400 or 40 feet for the sake of the oil of the lane, right? That will be when that car has the easiest time turning, because that whole time it's skidding in that oil, trying its best to turn. But then the minute it sees that dry part of the road, it'll have much easier time turning and getting in there, right? So this is useful for a lot of things, right? For a lot of things when you're thinking about adjusting, right? If that car is going slower, it'll have an easier time turning throughout the entire process because it has more grip on that surface. If the car's front wheels are spinning super fast, it's going to have a harder time picking up and have a harder time turning, right? So a lot of these concepts, you can think of a car as it's trying to turn on an icy road. But now, to think of how the oil pattern is breaking down, think those tires, every time that car goes on that road, the tires are always dry at the start, okay? As it's driving, the tires are getting wet because it's going over more ice. Now, when that ice cuts off, the tires are still wet. So after that spot where the ice has previously cut off, it's now making it wet beyond that cutoff point, which is like the carry down, right? Now, the types of tires the car has is dependent on the bowling ball you're throwing, right? If you have a ball that's low flare and is designed to read later, those are like your regular super shiny tires, right? They're skidding, and they seal that friction at the end, or the ice cuts off, and then they can turn all of a sudden, the car can turn. Versus your urethanes and your solids have some like grittier kind of tires, or maybe even like some like little chains kind of like added onto the tires. So the whole time they're having an easier time gripping on that surface, finding it easier for the car to turn in a more controlled manner. Now, you got to think those low flare ones are going to have easier time getting wetter, right? Because if there's chains on the car, like there is for your solid balls or for your high flare balls, they're having an easier time gripping the whole time, and they're always seeing a different part of the chain versus a normal car with like sports tires or whatever that are it's not very, very susceptible to friction whenever they see it in the last moment. They'll have a harder time turning, really, really hard time, and the minute they hit that asphalt and the ice cuts off, the car can turn all of a sudden, right? So a lot of concepts when it comes to trying to adjust and trying to navigate is just to think how those cars are going down the road. And just think of anytime someone throws a bowling ball, what kind of car are they driving? What kind of tires does that car have? What kind of like motion does that car look like it's making as it's going down that road? That to me is the best way to put some sort of real life thing you can visualize into something that we can't see, right? I mean, there's a million different ways you can try to visualize this concept, but so far, I think the car has been the most successful that myself and my students that I've coached have found to produce some sort of imagery for what it is that's happening in front of us. I have to get some more water soon. You guys like my Reese's cup? Get it? One of them kind of days. I'm beat. This is a good live stream. This has been a very, very good start. This is some good content that I think all of you will certainly benefit from hearing. So the challenge I proposed in the most recent video on the pathway of learning, I would not advise you do this in a league setting until you've practiced it, because you don't want to create a disadvantage for yourself when scoring actually matters, or especially don't do this for a tournament. But if you're used to playing only a certain part of the lane, like if you're used to only playing in the center zone or the first zone or the super deep and rely on a bunch of oil zone, I challenge you, even if you're not scoring well in the beginning, just try playing a different zone. Try playing around with something physically, or play around with your equipment to see how well you can score in a different zone of the lane. Now, after you've bowled, just bowl like 1 or 2 games on that new zone of something completely different than what you're used to. Like if you're always used to playing super duper deep and relying on that oil, play super duper shallow and play way to the right. Or if you're someone who has a hard time getting that ball to wheel enough, play super duper deep like a 2-hander and see what you can adjust to get that ball to strike, right? Now, even if you don't score well, that's fine. Now, go back to how you usually bowl. And now you're going to come to find and see, wow, like the oil is transitioning so much differently than what we're used to, than what I'm used to. Like if it's just you practicing alone and you're bowling one certain way, eventually if you've practiced enough times, you'll kind of have an idea of, okay, this is around where I should start. And as I bowl by myself or whatever, this is around where I move, because this is how I always break down the oil. Now, it's useful to know that stuff, but when you're bowling in a league or a tournament or something, it's not just you. There are other people around that you have to be cognizant of. And the lanes are never, ever, ever going to break down the same way. So by you bowling a different way in the start and creating a much different transition of that oil, now you know, okay, next time I'm bowling, if someone's bowling in the way I just was in that first game, I know kind of roughly how that oil is going to tend to transition as I'm playing in real time. Now, obviously, like I said, no one throws the ball the same way, but to any capacity, it at least helps you learn to navigate different things, because you don't want to become some cookie cutter bowler that only knows how to strike in one way, play one part of the lane. You want to be more of a Swiss Army knife. You want to be able to utilize different sorts of ball motion and create different sorts of ball motion and different navigation techniques with your physical side and even your mental side that helps you adjust to different situations that you come to find yourself in. I was thinking about asking for a new ball for Christmas. I was wondering what you suggested for me. Riley, for a new bowling ball. See, this is a tricky one. So, Riley, I know how you bowl, obviously. You don't throw nearly the same as you did, obviously. Like, I'm sure you know that, right? Like, your bowling ball, you're getting a lot more hook out of the bowling balls you're creating, because your hand position is in a much stronger and much better and improved position, which is awesome. I'm very proud of you for that. So I think a lot of your equipment that you have currently was more so, at least the older stuff you have, was more so catered toward your old release, and it was designed to do more with less because your hand position was not as strong back then. And then the newer equipment that you got kind of bridged that gap between the newer release and the older release. What I think you need and could certainly benefit from, because you are getting your hand into a much better spot, but your ball speed is still much faster comparative to the amount of rotation you're creating. I would say getting more of like a solid, or even, I wouldn't get a urethane, especially with all these new rules and the PBA Gold and stuff. I would get like a solid or a ball that's designed to read the lane a lot sooner. I wouldn't recommend an asymmetric ball because that's kind of defeat the purpose. So I would look up a symmetric solid ball. I think that would be something that's different than what you have, because I know like you want to get the cool stuff or the stuff that looks the best, but you don't want to get the same tool in your bag, right? You don't want to have 8 wrenches that are all the same size. You want to have some variance in that you're never going to bowl in the same thing like we were just discussing, right? And if you know that, if you have different tools you can utilize for different things, that'll help you get somewhere. And I think the only tool you're missing is like the big hammer, the big thing that's designed to hook a lot off the lane so you can get out of playing that first zone way on the outside and you can start to play a little bit less direct, more toward the center of the lane and get it to actually read and create a much more steep angle of entry. I think that's what you're missing. Because your speed is so much faster than your revolutions you're creating, that ball is very, very direct, and the angle of entry you're creating isn't that far to the side, right? Which is fine because you know how to play that part of the lane. But I think what'll help create you a different ball motion than everything else you have is something that's solid and is designed to read the lane sooner and more aggressively to where you can play more in the center of the lane and get it to hook and see more of that change in direction, if that makes sense. Or if you really, really wanted, I guess it kind of depends. No, I would just stick with that. I think that would be what I would advocate. Actual like brand, like balls. A lot of this new stuff that they're releasing is like pearls, and there's a couple hybrids that are okay, but some of the, like, you don't need like a crazy high performance. Well, I guess high performance is very, very bad. They're called high performance for like the crazy stuff that's like whatever. You need like a mid-performance, which is what we need, like a mid-performance, like symmetric solid piece. If you just go like bowlersmart.com or something, because I forgot, yeah, because with the weighted ball you throw, it doesn't really matter which one you get. They'll all give you a pretty similar, with where you're at now, they'll all give you a pretty similar motion. I would just look up symmetric solid bowling ball, and any of those will work. Literally any of them. They have a lot of good releases. Let me look up some symmetric solid. I just want to give you a couple names so you kind of know. A Phase 2, a Ion Pro Solid, if you want something that's pretty wicked, a Zen 25 is pretty good. That's a newer one. The Rockstar from Roto Grip, the Hammer Effect Tour, the 900 Global Sublime Focus, the Physics Blackout would be okay. An Ion Max would be pretty cool. A Storm Ion Max, that's the pink and purple and white one. That one's very pretty. I want to get one of those. Phase 2 is probably what my biggest one I would advocate on, because you can obviously grit it down if you need it to be a little bit more aggressive. Probably a Phase 2, or I know the Zen 25 isn't a solid, but it's a reactive, and that one's designed to really, really have a lot of longevity. So if you want to create like that more like hockey stick kind of motion, you could go with the 900 Global Zen 25. But you'd have to learn to lower your ball speed a bit and create more rotation. So that's what you want. If you like the way you throw and you don't want to worry about having to change a whole lot, get a solid. But if you want, like, get like that Phase 2 or the Ion Max. But if you want to get to become more versatile in your ball speed mechanics, I would get the Zen 25. I have that ball and I'm a big advocate on that. It's a really, very, very, very good aggressive ball for someone who's looking for something different, like polarized than the stuff they have in their bag. I'm gonna get some more water here. Hope that helps though. If you have anything else, just message me, I'll help you out. That's what I'm here for. You are welcome. I just saw your thank you. See, we still got like 15 minutes here. I'm trying to think of what else I could expand on. We like flew through these concepts today. If you're someone who's watching this video back, I know you're like, dang, he like was flying. So I'm hoping that as we continue to go along with this pathway of learning, I can kind of dive more into some of the stuff, because there's just a million and one things I could talk about, and it just never, ever ends. And plus, a lot of stuff that is going on with ball motion very directly relates to things that are happening physically. And I know all of us, everyone loves to talk about the physical stuff, and I do as well. So I do want to certainly get into that. I just don't want us to steer clear of that. We need to make sure we have a firm understanding of the whole navigation process, and be sure that I'm creating some sort of imagery for all of you to imagine in your minds as you're bowling on how that ball is, how that bowling ball is in fact navigating down the lane. Because it is kind of strange. Like when you, especially with that whole optical illusion video. Like, it is crazy. Like when you see those guys and you feel like they're creating a ton of angle of entry, like the guys that are in fact creating like 6 degrees, like Jason Belmonte and Oscar Palermo and all those guys, like you watch that and you're like, wow, like they have got to be coming in such a steep angle of entry. Like that, like 6 degrees, like that sounds like so much, but 6 degrees is like this much. Like that's all they're creating, because just with the way our eyes work and how depth perception is with humans, like it just makes it look so elusive and so different. I knew right as I was posting that optical illusion one, I was like, people are going to eat that one up, because I knew that one was, I know that stuff's pretty strange. I know, Riley, if you're still here, I know I talked about it with the school obviously quite a bit and the people I coach with the team, but I never like really mapped it out. And clearly I know I have to map that stuff out for people a lot more, because it's like crazy when you actually see how the actual like dimensions of the lane are in to scale versus like even this. Like this is not drawn to scale. I just drew it because it's what we're all used to seeing. Like again, when most of you are hooking the bowling ball 10 inches, this is all you're hooking the bowling ball. Which again, I did this in the last live stream. I think it's funny. This is the width of a bowling ball, by the way. It about covers up this whole ruler. This is all you're hooking the ball, right? From here to here. This is how much is moving to the side, right? Like that's crazy concept. So the navigation process looks different to our eyes than what the reality of it is. So I don't know if any of you have had an opportunity to do that challenge I suggested of recording a shot. I know a lot of people don't like recording themselves, but I would just get in the habit of doing it because it's just a good habit. Record yourself, watch how your physical game looks, and monitor where your foot was, where the ball released at, where it went over the arrows, how far it got down the lane before it got the furthest right, and where it hit on the head pin and where it exited the deck, and then draw that line. Make a dot on each of those. Here's where my foot was at the line. Here's where the ball was released to the line. Here's where it went over the arrows. Here's where it went down lane. Here's how far it got down lane and how far to the right it got down lane. Put a dot there. Here's where it hit the pocket. Put a dot there. Here's where it fell off the pin deck. Put a dot there. And draw that line through all that. And you're going to be like, wow. Wow. Like, that's crazy. That's crazy. Crazy, 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 crazy. Crazy. And again, like, this just kind of feeds into the whole, like, why I think that oil is the biggest thing for people to understand, is because when you don't realize how much that oil is doing. Like, when this is all the bowling ball's hooking, for most people, is this, like, you don't think that oil is making it just skid for so long. If you watch that video and see the video of my buddy Rob bowling, and you watch his ball, it just skids. Like the ball just does not move. And obviously he didn't strike in there, so he missed kind of light. But still, it's like, wow, like that thing just skid the whole way down the lane. It saw no change in direction at all and everything else. So again, like the oil is making a big difference. Understanding how to navigate that stuff and create an advantage for yourself is huge, huge. But obviously we have to understand, again, why this pathway of learning is laid out. You have to understand how the pins are falling. So even if you're navigating it correctly, you know, okay, I navigated it, but didn't use enough of the head pin, or used too much of the head pin, or the ball died out on me, or whatever, right? I know, ooh, here's something I could do to close this out. So this will be probably, if not the next video in the pathway of learning, it'll be the one following the next video, where I kind of talk about a big problem that a lot of bowlers can't see, and that is when the ball rolls out, or when it doesn't roll at all. So obviously this feeds pretty directly in the angle of entry, but when that ball, when you're playing, usually it happens with solids, and it happens all the time with urethanes because they instantly read the lane and hook. When the bowling ball hooks and uses all of its energy, I disagree with that. That whole like energy storage thing, I don't agree with that. I'll talk about that later. But when the technology inside the ball that's designed to make it process, there's a process of procession. That will definitely be the next video probably. The process of procession and how the tech actually takes over and makes the ball hook, so to speak, right? If that process happens in cahoots with the amount of oil you're using, that's what creates that sort of longevity and that continuity between the pins that we want. But if your ball doesn't use the tech soon enough and it uses it too late, even if you're hitting the right part of the head pin, it tends to not have enough continuity and deflects a ton. Even if you hit the right spot, like if you've ever watched people leave a pocket 8-10, usually that's because the ball just, it's like the process of precession is trying to happen. The inside of that ball is trying to do its work, but it just never did. It didn't have enough time. So even though you hit the right spot on the head pin for the angle of entry you're creating, the ball just had no momentum to the side to where it just the whole time just bounced off of everything. And it's so frustrating. If you've ever seen the Lily, the 5-7-10 split, that's a big problem. A pocket 7-10, that's usually why that happens. But it can also happen if the ball rolls out. If the ball rolls out, that's where that precession process happens too quick. So it sees too much friction, the inside of the ball does too much, and bang. So it's almost like you'll see it, and it hooks, and then it like straightens out. I know exactly that you guys know what I'm talking about. You may not know what I'm talking about yet, but if you see it, you'll know it. Like, here goes the ball, and it hooks, and then it like goes straight all of a sudden. That's when the ball rolls out. And then when it hits the pins, same problem. It bounces off of literally everything because it has no give on the side to get it to travel through the pins enough. Even if you're hitting the right spot, it just has no continuity. There's no good amount of energy as it's traveling through the pins. So you have to see how much longevity it's creating off of the oil and make sure that ball does still have some good continuity from that 3 degree or 6 degree of angle of entry you're creating to where it carries through the pins the right way. A lot of that just comes with navigating the oil correct way, but you can be getting to the pocket, as we've learned with angle of entries. You can be getting to the pocket, but it might not be the right amount of the pocket based off of the angle of entry you're creating. So, alrighty. I'm going to open up the floor for questions because I don't want to go, if I go any further, I'm going to dive into stuff I have not put in the pathway of learning. I don't like going into something without giving the viewers a chance to see it and hear me speak about it in a video first. So I will have any questions any of you have, whether it be about the oil breakdown I talked about in the beginning of the video, catering the lane to yourself, creating an advantage / disadvantage, if you so choose to be that way. I can understand. I was that way. If you want to talk about the rollout thing that I kind of briefly touched on, if you want to talk about the car analogy, if you want to talk about anything, if you want to talk about anything unrelated to this, if you want to complain about how urethane's being banned in some tournaments, you can talk about that. If you want to talk about the history of bowling, if you want to talk about whatever, I'll talk about any of it. Whatever you guys got. Because I don't want to dive too much into stuff that I have not fully covered yet, because that's just unfair for you guys. Very, very, very unfair. With the urethane thing, I will say I'm quite surprised that they did that. I'm very surprised. I'm not saying I dislike or like it, because you don't want to become reliant on one piece of equipment too much. Like, think of like golfing and everyone's only using a putter for everything. Like, sure, you can do that, but like, why? Like, that's kind of frustrating for the people that are trying to learn and get better with different clubs and learn different stances and stuff, and someone who's just putting is just winning the whole thing. And before I get some backlash on this, I know some people will complain and say, oh, Coach Logan's against the urethane or for the urethane ban. Look, I've been there. I own one, right? If anyone's bold, I promise, I own one. And I used to throw it religiously. I used to throw it for everything. I threw it in leagues, I threw it on tournaments, I threw it on sport shots, I threw it in everything because I just was unable to do anything. It's like a be-all, give-all kind of ball. You need a ball that hooks more, throw a urethane. You need a ball that hooks less, throw a urethane. You need a ball that has more control, throw a urethane. You need a ball that does anything. People just grab a urethane or a purple hammer, right? It's crazy to me that a ball has to get banned for being just too good and too overused. And plus, those urethane balls, why there's such a big debate on it is because the urethane balls are actually an old school thing that were used way back in the day, but they're still relevant today because they're just so smooth and the ball motion they create. Like, instead of like the reactive stuff where it chews up a bunch of oil and then sees all the action in the back, it's even more than a solid, because the solids for sure, like, they read really quick and they're smooth, but urethane is like the instant that it's on the lane, it's chewing up oil, and the flare is so little that it's always rolling its oil over itself. So it's chewing up a ton of oil within the first like 20 feet, and it's just rolling over that oil that it chewed up the whole way, which is why it's so smooth. It doesn't really hook. It kind of just like curves real slow. And because of that, the energy is always constant and it always has decent continuity. Sometimes you might fall victim to that rollout kind of thing since it's using up a ton of energy really quickly. So it tends to leave a lot of 10 pins and stuff. But like, the younger generation, especially with so many bowlers swapping to the two-handed and the new releases, and people are branching off of the traditional approaches, like, people are struggling to find a way to navigate the lane without utilizing so much oil. And if a urethane is designed to be super smooth and take advantage of the oil super quick and then skid over that oil, it's just super smooth ball motion. So any bowler can create a decent score with that because it's just so versatile. But when you have 9 bowlers throwing urethane and 1 person bowling reactive, with those urethane balls chewing up so much oil in the beginning and redepositing all of it in the back end, the pattern is just getting so messed up, and it's making, for the bowlers that are trying to use different equipment, it's creating such an advantage for the urethane players, because I guess this is a pretty relevant topic. Like, it's creating such an advantage for these urethane players because that back end of the oil could have 5 extra feet of just junk, of just that splash zone. So it makes the reactive stuff never ever have a good ball motion, because it's like, if you stand where they're standing, the ball is going to hook instantly because the beginning of the lane is so chewed up. But if you stand away from them but get it over that splash zone, the ball just never has any flair. Like, it never has any give to it. It just skids the whole way. So I can understand where the frustration comes, and I can see the idea of trying to grow the sport, but without me sounding too negative, the popularity of this sport, unfortunately, is not nearly what I was wishing it was, and it stinks that they're drawing away the next generation of bowlers by banning that stuff, because that's a shame. Like, I want to see as many people be as involved in bowling as I can, because bowling has done so much for me to give back to me in my life that it's unfair to punish somebody else for wanting to use a piece of equipment that the sport provides. So I don't disagree nor agree with the decision to ban the urethane, but to any capacity, if you're bowling up against urethane, because this is very pertinent to the topic I discussed here, like, the breakdown of the oil is just wicked. Like, it just breaks down the oil like crazy. So keep that in mind when you're bowling up against different things, is to understand the equipment other people are using, the equipment you're using, how your ball motion is, what kind of physical game you have and stuff, and make your adjustments based off of the stuff that you know you're good at when it comes game time. And when you're in practice the stuff you know you struggle with, right? If you are phenomenal at navigating the far right outside part of the lane, then practice something else. Practice navigating toward the middle of the lane. Learn how to create a different ball motion to where you're not in a pickle super often. Because if you're only good at playing one zone, or really good at one zone but at another, and really good at another, that one time, of course, it happens every time, I can tell you, the one time that you're in that middle spot, or whatever spot that you're kind of at, is, of course, when you're in the final of something, or of course when scoring really, really matters in this given moment. Like, it's just so typical. That's just all part of any sport in general, right? So learn to become a Swiss Army knife, not a cookie cutter bowler, because there is no one way to bowl. But finding different means of navigating that ball and finding different means of striking will make you reign supreme 11 times out of 10. I promise you. I promise you. You have to be willing to step out of your comfort zone in practice and make that uncomfortable zone a comfort zone when it comes to scoring, right? So, alrighty, phenomenal live stream. This was great topics of conversation. I'm super excited we got to this point in the pathway of learning where I can talk about what my specialty is, and that is navigating the lane transition and the physical stuff, right? So once we get into that, the mental stuff will start to come too, and that'll be super duper fun. There's so much that goes into this part, so bear with me. Making these videos and editing it takes longer, because I want to be more methodical with how I'm speaking, because some of these concepts, well, all these concepts, are very foreign to every other sport. So I need to make sure that I'm getting my point across the best way that I can. So as always, if any of you have any questions, leave a comment, leave a subscription, post in the community, do anything you can, reach out to me by any means, and I promise I will help all of you out as quickly and as accurately as I can. So if you need anything, let me know. Until then, take care, guys.